just really honored to be asked to be part of the show. The work that I'm showing here today, I actually have not shown in person before. It's 3 of the about 10 paintings that I did for during the time that I was writing the new album Post Traumatic, and they're prominently featured in the album packaging.
Hi, I'm Dennis Morris. We're at the Barker Hangar at the Pop Art Photo Fair. I'm exhibiting my work of Bob Marley and the Sex Pistols, and I'm very excited to be here. My work with Bob Marley stems from my first meeting with him, which was in 1974, and basically I'd met up with him. He was doing his first tour of England, and I went to the club where he was playing and waited, eventually he turned up. And I said, "Can I take your picture?" And he said, "Yeah, man, come in." And he really took to me, and our friendship began from there, and also our working relationship. Sex Pistols, basically with the Sex Pistols, we all more or less grew up in the same vicinity in London, in the East End of London, and we all left school at the same time, wanting to be photographers, artists, designers, whatever it may be, because England at the time was going through a huge recession, and so 77 we all piled out of school looking for work. I knew I wanted to be a photographer, and so really basically what happened was, by the time the Pistols had got their deal together, John Lydon, Johnny Rotten as he was called him then, saw those work pictures of mine and said he wanted me to work with them. And so our friendship began from there, and our working relationship began from there.
This is my message to you. Don't worry about a thing. 'Cause every little thing gonna be alright.
Hi, I'm Glenn Wexler. I'm a photographer and director. I'm here tonight at the Pop Art Photo Show in Santa Monica at Barker Hangar, and I'll talk a little bit about my work. I'm showing work primarily that I shot in the 80s. It's supporting a new book that I have coming out called the 80s Portrait Sessions. On the far wall I have a shot of Michael Jackson, full length. I also have a black and white portrait of Michael. I have a picture of Bob Weir from the Grateful Dead, Herbie Hancock, Shaka Khan, ZZ Top, and Del Bozio from Missing Persons. I'm also showing an album cover of Missing Persons from the early 80s. On this wall here I have a series of different shots also from the 80s with different models. And on the end cap on the other side I have an image which is the most recent piece, shot in 207. Is a piece of key art for a theatrical play called Patriotic Bitch.
Hi, I'm Jim Evans. I'm probably one of the few artists in the show tonight. Most of it is like photography, because it's called a pop art photo show, so that makes sense. But Pierre Unlimited Run decided to put me in. It's kind of a small retrospective of my work. I mean, it covers things from the mid-'80s, silkscreen pieces that I did with in a collaboration with Richard Duardo. And in addition, there's a lot of rock posters I've done in the 90s. So those were silkscreen as well, but a completely different technique than the really multi-layered personality pieces. Most of the stuff with Richard was all personality-based portrait pieces done kind of in conjunction with Playboy magazine and a bunch of different galleries. Then later on, I moved on to the rock posters in the early 90s using the same silkscreen technique, but going back to a more hand-drawn style that I had done. So none of it was portrait-oriented. It was more cartoon, pop culture-oriented. Then I evolved into like sort of what you see now, like right around the corner from here. There's like a collaboration I did with Risk, the graffiti artist, and those are like multimedia completely. I did stencil art, and we blew stencils up really big, and painted graffiti-like backgrounds, laid the stencils over the top of them, painted more layers in on top of that. So they're probably the most contemporary pieces, but at the same time, the current rock posters are the same kind of a thing, but they're much more fastidious and ink-oriented. So it moves on from graffiti styles to graphic design to silkscreen, so a multitude of different styles to create kind of a pop culture look that's gone on for like the last 35 years, I guess, right? So it represents about 35 years worth of work. I was originally in a rock band, and I started doing posters for the band, painting people's guitars and drum heads. And a lot of things conspired to lead me from not making very much money in a rock band to making more money by doing posters for rock bands. And I went to art school. I started getting work really quick. I did album covers, movie posters, did a lot of stuff for Surfer Magazine. And I was inspired probably initially by Rick Griffin, who was a rock poster artist from the San Francisco era. He got me into underground comic books. So underground comic books kind of led to doing album covers and things like that. I moved to Hawaii, kind of developed out my style a little bit more and more detail. Then I came back and started doing a series of skateboard posters, album covers for the Beach Boys, the Allman Brothers, Jan and Dean, Neil Young, and things just took off for me. Did a few movie posters, did Big Wednesday, a couple others, and then moved into the 80s, started doing more design work, the silkscreen pieces you see here, and into the 90s. Probably got more into the digital age in the 90s, but at the same time I was doing rock posters, so I had kind of running on two tracks. But I would say I was originally inspired by the graphic design of the early 60s. That's when I was in art school, and that's when things were really happening. So I was kind of like the right guy for the job at the time.
I'm Zach Merrick, and I'm a feature director, and I have, I think, a pretty incredible collection of movie posters that were handed down from my dad. It's something that, mostly my work is from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the posters that I love that I brought into the show, and it kind of was cool. Like when Pierre and Stacy first called me, it kind of fit right into the whole idea of a, pop art photo show. So I think that that's why, they invited me to bring a lot of my collection into the room and kind of put it with all the other photographers and artists and things like this that are in the room. So one of my favorite movie posters is actually this one right behind us. It's Night of the Living Dead. And the reason that I particularly love this one is not only is it one of my favorite films of all time, but the actual art is actually quite rare because the movie was never intended to be as big as it was, right? So if you think about it, the actual production, could only afford a certain number of posters to be made, right? So for something like this that's so big and oversized, it's actually quite exciting. It's quite rare, and I love it because, one thing that I love about movie posters from the 60s, 70s, 80s, a lot of the stuff you're seeing in the show, is that the actual artwork, the painting or the photograph or whatever that went into it, it's actually telling the story. It's telling the story of the movie that you're going to see. Another poster that you guys will see here that I quite like is Richard Amzel's painting for Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of my favorite movies of all time, and it's definitely one of those posters where, it's this painting of Indiana Jones with the hat, with the jacket, with the bullwhip, the whole thing, and it's one of those where the physical poster that's actually in the room is the one that's from my childhood bedroom, right? So I would look at that and I wanted to be him. I wanted to be Indiana Jones and aspire to, be that tough and be that cool. So, if we're going to ask about a poster that sticks out the most in my head, I think that would be the one. That's my earliest memory of falling in love with the artwork of a movie poster. Another poster that's here that I think is quite great is my dad had all of these different Star Wars posters, and you'll see them in the back of the room. When I grew up as an 80s kid, so, I first saw Star Wars at a drive-in. I didn't line up in the theater in 1977 and watch it there. I was still too little. I think I was 1. When it was re-released in the 80s, like Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, these were all posters that just lived with me, with artwork by Tom Jung, with artwork by Drew Struzan, these guys that, essentially created, I think that they're the forefathers of what made movie posters so popular. There was a time in like the late 70s and 80s, I think, that suddenly these artists were, as big as, the biggest rock photographers and people like this in the industry. And essentially, these movie poster artists are who set the tone for the movie you were about to see, the story that you were about to see. And, to me, that's just fascinating how they could take, a little inspiration from the director or maybe a clip from the movie that they saw and then essentially create this beautiful painting from scratch. And it's something that's, burned into our memories and represents the movie.
My name's Niels Lozauer, Los Angeles-based photographer for the last 48 years, and I'm here at Pierre Voudrag's wonderful photo pop art exhibit at the Barker Hangar in Santa Monica, California. It's a shot of Mick and Keith from the Rolling Stones. I shot that back in 1972, Winterland, San Francisco, California, and what else is there to say? It's the Rolling Stones. I was a sort of little, rock and roll fanatic when I was younger, and, I used to buy records and buy magazines and get the pictures out and hang them on my wall in my parents' bedroom, the house where I lived. And one day I bought a camera and brought it to the Rolling Stones at the Forum in 1969, and the rest was history. That's one of my friends, Eddie Van Halen, guitarist for the band Van Halen. That was shot in 1980, shot of Ed. Looks like he's about 10 miles high in the sky. He probably was, and that's about it. Another one of my photos. That's Led Zeppelin, Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, shot probably at the Forum, 1975. It's sort of hard to find shots where Jimmy and Robert together. Same thing with Mick and Keith over here, because I think they hate each other, so it's really hard to find shots where you get them both in the same frame.
Rodrigo Cavula. This is my first collection of art that I've produced since leaving Tesla. So my background's in industrial design, but I've spent a lot of time in automotive, specifically in kind of color and material development. So this was kind of a project that tapped a little bit into more of my childhood and like the meaning of colors in cars, and I wanted to kind of bring a lot of these to life. So I had the chance to work with BASF, which is a chemical company, and they basically supply a lot of the pigments and all the solvents to the OEMs. And they gave me access to their archives, so I had the chance to work with them and kind of develop these colors, and kind of use each case study as a car kind of captured in time.